experiences, because what I found over my lifetime, I suspect many of us here have, is it's our own experiences that give us the aha moment. Now, I'm very fortunate because I didn't have to go through an MDE, but I have been walking between worlds since I was 4 years old. I had my first multidimensional experience at 4. I was the daughter of a coal miner up in the north of England. You can't get much grounded than being the daughter of a coal miner in the north of England. And yet, when I was 4 years old, I was settling down to sleep, and this scarlet light came into the room and started to talk to me. And when you're 4 years old, hey, normal, natural. And that really began a lifetime's exploration, experiences of multidimensional realities and consciousness. So for me, I was incredibly fortunate because I never had to go through those 54 years of this is all there is. From 4 years old, I knew this wasn't all there is. But my own journey meant that beginning as a mystic, I then went to do a master's degree in physics at Oxford University, and they tried very hard to convince me that this was all it is. And then I went into international business, which was a scenic route back to what is the deeper understanding of what we call reality. And so all of these threads, as I'm sure they have for all of us, feel as though they've been building into a tapestry of understanding. And that understanding, as Evan said, the journey continues. But I think a lot of us have got to a point in our own journeys where we get it. We get it, that this isn't all there is. We get it. There's something deeper, meaningful, purposeful to the meaning of life, to the meaning of reality. And what I'm really excited about as being a cosmologist, which basically just means I ask why a lot. Why this, why that, why the other. And it's not just about the physical world, but it's the bigger why, as well as the how. We lived in an amazingly exciting time where all of these threads are coming together too. So, as you were mentioning, and Irvin's very cognizant with ancient, as I am, I started studying ancient Egyptian wisdom teachings, Sanskrit writings when I was 4 or 5 years old. What we're realising, all of us, I think, is that the ancient sages had amazingly profound insights that we're now coming to restate in different terminologies. What I would say is, for a while I was very sniffy, even though I described myself as a cosmologist and had all these, doctorates and masters and stuff. I was very sniffy about modern science, and I realised that I shouldn't be. Because we've had this more than 2,500 years. If we go back to ancient India, we probably go back 5,000 to 6,000 years of deep insights that came then through the Egyptian understanding, the Greek understanding, and on and on. But what we've done is we've taken a path in the last few hundred years that I think is absolutely crucial for our human story. And Barbara's at the absolute forefront of evolutionary process. And what my sense is that, I'm going to go back to the Big Bang in a while. Okay? I'm going to start at the very beginning and sort of work our way forwards. But just at this point, to feel this sense of destiny that you were talking about earlier on, because I agree with that. And what I think happened about 300 years ago is we got to a stage in our collective psyche where not so much spirituality, but religiosity had ruled the sway. And for me, spirituality is all about searching for meaning, wherever that road takes us, and many roads up the mountain. But I think 300 years ago, certainly in the West, we had a very dogmatic and dogmatised approach to the state of religion. So when Isaac Newton and Descartes came along, the earliest sort of scientific endeavour, really, if they strayed too far in the remit of religion, they were living in very dangerous territories. People were burnt at the stake, people were actually put on house arrest for the whole life. So what we had, I think, 300 years ago is a curiosity to understand more about the nature of reality, not hidebound by the way religion was at that point, but striking off on its own. And because of the dangers of straying into religious territory, focused on physical reality, because that was allowed. You were allowed as a scientist to explore physical reality, but if you got anything closer to the deeper meaning of life and reality, you were in trouble. But I think what that did was it started a schism in our collective psyche. And that schism continued, and really has continued up to fairly recently, insofar that with the Newtonian perspective of physical reality, though Isaac himself, I think as earlier said, knew far more. I mean, Isaac Newton was the last alchemist, in a way. He wrote far more about alchemy and esoteric subjects than he did about mathematics and physics. But nonetheless, that became so successful that it did become the groundwork, the seed point for this endeavour and this curiosity to take us forward. And that progress has continued. But of course, what then happened a couple of hundred years later, the mechanistic approach of Newton was thrown up in the air, all because of a hot oven. Now, you know, I bake cakes. I've never had that sort of breakthrough looking into a hot oven. But Max Planck and Albert Einstein did, because what they realised, very simplistically, but absolutely key, up until then, with the mechanistic approach to physical reality, a hot oven should be radiating an infinite amount of energy. And they thought, this doesn't work, and my oven doesn't radiate infinite amounts of energy. And what they realised was actually energy is radiated in bursts, and that's where quantum comes from, these packets of energy. So that really kick-started the quantum revolution. Now what, of course, the quantum revolution then did is it got us deep into unfamiliar territory, where if we measure something, it's realised, but unless we measure or observe it, it's not realised. It actually blurred the apparent separation of observer and what's observed. It also had this indeterministic wave-particle concept. A lot of things were being opened up by the quantum revolution, but the deeper philosophical understandings that it really shone in bright lights were not addressed. It was not acceptable to go down that philosophical rabbit hole and find out what might be the other side. In fact, at Princeton, I think it was, there was an office that said, philosophers keep out. You know, we don't want philosophers here, we just want scientists here. And the other pillar, really, of 20th century science was relativity theory. So on one hand, you had revolutionary approaches to the very, very small, the quantum world, with all of that uncertainty and questionings around it. And on the very large, the absolute nature of space and time, which had been the understanding since Newton's era, was thrown up in the air by Albert Einstein, who basically said time is relative to the observer and the speed of the observer. Space is relative to the position, the speed of the observer. And yet, together, they form an invariant space-time. Now this is crucial, both in terms of the relativity aspect of it, but also when you add space and time together, that they're invariant. In other words, any observer, anywhere, any when in our universe will measure the same event as long as it's measured in space-time terms. But if they just look at it spatially, or just look at it in time terms, they'll get different answers. So that again gave us some deep clue as to the nature of reality. But again, it was pushed to the side, and science really went down a technological route. And that's what it's been doing ever since. And of course, most scientists that aren't physicists or cosmologists are still back in the Newtonian era, as Evan said. You know, most biologists haven't even got into relativity or even quantum physics. And that's true of most other scientists. So there's a catch-up. But I believe the catch-up is happening really quickly, and I feel we're on the verge of a 21st century revolution of science. But crucially, this revolution isn't just about science. It's about the nature of reality itself, about how we see ourselves, how we understand reality on multidimensional levels. And it does that because the 20th century science had an elephant in the room, as I say, that nobody was willing to address, and that was the nature of consciousness. Now, Newtonian science is so reductionist, but quantum physics was starting to realise that there may be quantum processes within the brain that could somehow bridge between what was thought of as matter of brain and non-matter of mind, okay, to bridge that. But they couldn't go far enough. And they couldn't go far enough because the 21st century scientific revolution, which we're going to talk about today, was not yet born. It's still in the birth canal now. It's still, we're all pushing, I'm breathing, I'm pushing. But that's where it is, but it is imminently emergent. And as I say, it's not just of science, it's for everyone. It's for everyone. Because what it's showing, what is being revealed, isn't just being revealed at the levels of the quantum, tiny, or the levels of the furthest reaches of space, big, relativity, quantum theories, literally every scale in between, and across all fields of science, from chemistry to complex systems, biology to mineralogy, to cosmology. Every level, and crucially, it's being revealed at the level of our everyday lives. And this is where I think the transformational breakthrough can be. Because science is, you know, I don't get out much. I'm a nerd. I do not get out much. I really should get out more. The thing is, for most folks, you know, the quantum realm might be interesting. Relativity might be interesting. Our GPS, the rest of it works on those principles. But is it going to be interesting for the person living their everyday lives, going down the supermarket, working in an office, how they see themselves? And I think the 20th century science out there, the technologies have taken us forward, but this is a 21st century revolution of consciousness, of awareness, of who are we? And in many ways, I believe it's a remembering process, because that schism in our collective psyche that really began several hundred years ago, and this extreme extension of it, really has brought us to the edge of calamity, catastrophe. Because that reductionist approach means that we see each other as separate. We can hurt other people without having any sense that we might be hurting ourselves. To treat other beings who share the planetary home with us badly, and we treat our planetary home appallingly. Because we see our planet as some background, some sort of non-sentient, non-living, non-consciousness that we live on, and so we can raid, pillage, plunder, whatever we might do. And we treat each other appallingly. And my sense is our worldview drives our behaviours. If our worldview is fragmented, then our behaviours are fragmented. If our worldview is healed and whole, however much of a work in progress it may be, then for me that is transformational of how we see ourselves, how we see each other, how we see the wider world, how we see our planetary home, how we see the nature of reality itself. And that's what I think we're on the verge of. Because the whole mind, body, spirit, new paradigm movement has got us so far. And this isn't about arithmetic, this is about vibration, this is about attunement, this is about coherence, as Irvin said. Nonetheless, there are a lot of folks within our collective psyche who either haven't had the experiences or have been peer grouped, limited through all sorts of experiences. And for them, the science is their comfort blanket. There was a great article, there was a great headline on the British papers a couple of years ago. Science has proved that yoga works. Right? Yeah, science says it, so it's fine. We can go there, we can do it. And a lot of people still buy into that perspective that if science says it's right, we'll follow that. So what's happening now is literally, over the last couple of years only, the evidence, the experimental evidence, the discoveries, the insights have increased exponentially to evidentially support this emerging new paradigm, which is what I want to really share with you today. Because this, I think, does have the ability to reach a lot of folks for whom science is their comfort blanket, and they will follow that. And I feel that for us, I want to go back and talk more about the Big Bang to now and our evolutionary processes, but I do feel this is the time whose idea has come, because this is the time that is urgent. We have the fierce urgency of the now to make some radical, positive, transformational changes, not just in the way that we see the world, but how we behave in the world. So that's setting the scene. So what's this 21st century emergent revolution all about? Well, first of all, as I say, it's being shown up across discoveries across all scales, from the most minute to the entire universe. It's being shown up across all sciences. And what it's showing is that basically the virtual realities, has anybody experienced any virtual reality simulations? Don't they seem real? Oh yes. Well, and everybody's sort of had an experience with a fairly high-tech hologram. I'm a high-tech hologram. Kim Kardashian is a high-tech hologram. Barbara's a high-tech hologram. We're all high-tech holograms. But if you experience virtual reality and the latest holograms, literally, they are the gizmos, they are the kids' toys, for which physical reality is the masterclass. Because what's being shown is that the information, and Irving describes it as I do as information, that the information that's the basis of all our technologies, the information that can make virtual reality simulation seem so real, the information that actually structures a hologram, and the latest holographic technologies are on the edge of achieving, so that if you actually approach a hologram, instead of your hand going through it, which has been the case hitherto, it will feel like the object it represents. So if you have a hologram of an apple and touch it, it will feel like an apple. That is very close to being achieved. So essentially, all the information that doesn't just flow and interact with and form the basis and the context for our virtual realities and holograms is exactly the same as the information that is universal, that is the stuff, the most fundamental stuff of our universe. And as I say, this understanding is showing up across many, many different scales of discovery at the moment. What it's showing is that information is more fundamental than energy and matter. Energy and matter are equivalent. We've known that 100 years. That's what Einstein showed us. But information is more fundamental than energy and matter, and is more fundamental than space and time. I'm going to come back to that with some examples to really try and help us get that, because this isn't an intellectual gettingness. If we don't get this at the experience level, if we don't realise this at the everyday level, we won't be able to transform our perspective. It'll be an interesting look at. It'll widen our view, but will it revolutionise how we behave as a species? Probably not, but if we get it, then it will. And that's what I want to share with you today and help us get it, so you can go out and help other people get it, and the bubbles go forward. Let me give you some examples of this. The same holographic, and Eben talked about holographic, because what we're realising is that within our universe, reality is holographic. In other words, it reflects each other, and it scales up and it scales down. One example is that the same holographic patterns of information that guide phase transitions in atomic structures are exactly the same informational patternings that guide vast energy fields that galaxies and clusters of galaxies are structured along. So atomic scale to clusters of galaxies, the same holographic patterns, the same harmonic, resonant relationships that describe earthquakes, describe their frequency and describe their destructive power, are exactly the same as when we've analysed, I say we, I didn't do it personally, but it has been analysed, 300 years of human conflicts. You think about all the reasons we go to war, all the reasons we fall out with the neighbour, all the reasons we have a regional hissy fit, and you plot the frequency of those conflicts against the scale of the fatalities endured by them, the mayhem they cause. You do the same thing with earthquakes, guess what? You get exactly the same graph. So the same patterns that play out in earthquakes play out in human conflicts. How cool is that? Cities grow informationally in exactly the same way as galaxies evolve. The same dynamic informational fractal attractors that underpin the evolution and emergence of ecosystems are exactly the same as those that underlie and pervade the internet and the World Wide Web. And all the social behaviours that have been investigated so far. The way we return library books, the way we do our mobile phone usage, is exactly the same as ecosystems evolve. Just think about that for a moment. For me, what that says is there is no difference. We look at the outside world, we look at the natural world, and then we look at our own stuff. We look at something as simple as how we return library books, or how we surf the net, or how we chat with each other, or whatever we may do, and realise that those are exactly the same holographic patterns that pervade natural systems, whether it's earthquakes, whether it's galaxies, whether it's whatever it may be. Because this is showing up, the same patterns are showing up throughout human behaviours and through our entire universe at every scale, from the Planck scale, the most minute, to our entire universe, is really reflecting back into our faces. Something profound about the fundamental interconnectedness of all that we call reality. You know? Just hold that thought, because I want to come back at the end of what I'm doing with you today, and I'd just like to take us into attunement with that understanding. But before we go there, we've got a long way to go to our evidence and understanding of all of this. What is being realised is that material reality is essentially ephemeral. Irving referred to it, Evans referred to it, I referred to it. But to do that, I need my brick. My baby brick. This looks pretty solid. Solid? This isn't a magician's trick, pretty solid. Pretty solid. Barbara, just a third one. Oh yeah, solid. This brick, at the very most, is 99.99999999999% no thingness. Okay? So just put the brick to one side for a moment. This is a proton. Yeah? This is a proton of a hydrogen atom, okay, scaled up rather large, much smaller than this. If this is the proton, the nucleus of a hydrogen atom, the electron of the atom, if you look through the back and keep going and keep going and keep going to the trees, beyond the trees, over half a mile away is the electron. Yeah? The rest is no thingness. But more than that, if this proton is scaled up to the size of the Earth, the electron itself would still be vanishingly small. We haven't measured the electron, it's too small to measure. The quarks that make up this proton are too small to measure. This proton looks of itself solid, but essentially it is just excitations in the energy field. That's all it is. It's not solid. It's a lot less solid than it appears. Great. But basically, that ping pong ball's been jumping around all day. It's ephemeral. It's incredibly ephemeral. The reason we don't see it through the floor is for one reason only. Something called the Pauli exclusion principle. And basically that's to do with the way that these excitations behave. And if you think of excitations like my fingers, okay? If my fingers are parallel, they can move through each other, yeah? But if those fingers are doing that, and those fingers are doing that at 90 degrees, that looks pretty solid. The only reason we don't go through the floor is the way that these excitations behave essentially at right angles to each other, yeah? If they're in parallel, we'd be through the floor. it's as simple as that. So we have this incredible appearance of solidity, but it is truly, truly ephemeral. Now that recognition has been around for quite some time, although I think on an everyday level we still sort of, it's difficult to get our head around. The other thing though that is much more recent is the realisation that information is physical, whatever we mean by physical. And this was hypothesised some while ago by a physicist called Leah Szilard, and then backed up by an information theorist called Rolf Landau. And basically what Leo and Rolf said was exactly that information is physical, that it behaves just like physicality, that when you erase a piece of information, you create heat, which is pretty physical. Okay? But until 2012, that was still a hypothesis. In 2012, Antoine Véron and his collaborators proved it. They showed that when you erase one bit of information, heat is produced. And heat is produced exactly in line with the laws of thermodynamics that Boltzmann discovered a couple of hundred years ago. So what we've known for the last 4 years is that information is physical. Now we've got a link, a real strong link between information, heat, temperature, work. And you can't get much more physical than heat, temperature and work. Okay? So the recognition that these are coming together, materiality is ephemeral, information is real, is opening the door to much deeper understandings of what's going on. Now, we need to now move on and tell the story of our universe, because what Eben talked about as consciousness exactly is that. And the end of this story is exactly the destination that Eben and Irvin were talking about earlier. In other words, we come to the end of the story I'm about to share with you, that everything we call reality is consciousness, expressing itself, evolving, experiencing, learning, co-creating at every level of awareness. But we really need, if we're going to get this into the people's general understanding, then we need to bridge what that actually means. And one of the things that's being bridged at the moment is really by the guys who are at the leading edge of technologies, because the guys who are at the leading edge of virtual realities and holograms. You know, Elon Musk the other day said, in his view, physical reality was a simulation. The only difference between him and my own view is he thinks it's an advanced alien race, of which we're a simulation, and I feel we should take a bigger picture of cosmic intelligence, of which we are microcosms. But the point is that what we now are doing, and what we're in the position to do now, is restate the laws of physical reality in terms of information. 200 years ago, Ludwig Boltzmann committed suicide because he came up with two fundamental laws of reality called the first and second law of thermodynamics. And nobody believed him. Nobody bought into it. And he was so disappointed and distressed by that. And he was fairly fragile anyway. He committed suicide. He committed suicide not long before there was validating evidence that what he was saying was correct. But those two laws really are fundamental. They precede quantum theory and relativity, but what they do is they're now able to embrace quantum theory and relativity. Because part of the problem of the 20th century revolution is that quantum theory doesn't talk to relativity, and relativity doesn't talk to quantum theory, because they have different notions of space and time. And this is where we're now at a point where we can reconcile them at last through the process of understanding information. And the way this goes is that the first law of thermodynamics, now who knows about the first law of thermodynamics?
Entropy is increasing. Entropy is increasing.
Second law.
Oh, second.
Second law. Thank you, Nora. Good girl. The first law is all about conservation of energy in a closed system. Okay? If we restate that on the basis of our entire universe, then what the first law restated as the first law of information states is that Information expressed as energy matter is universally conserved. In other words, from the very beginning of our universe to its end, all the information expressed as energy matter was there from the get-go. Although it changed its form, it will be there at the end. So we're all 13.8 billion years old. And I have to say, Jane, you look like a day older. But essentially, all the energy matter was there from the get-go. So information expressed as it, whether it's gravities, electromagnetism, all of that just changes its form as we go forward. That, to cut a very, very long story, very, very short, is the essence of quantum theory. In other words, quantum theory is ultimately about information expressed as energy matter. And it has no notion of time. We go on, thanks to Nora, to the second law of thermodynamics, re-expressed in terms of information. And this says that information expressed as space and time is entropic. In other words, it always increases. And that's the law of thermodynamics, that if anything else doesn't work, that one does within our physical reality. How many of you got kids? Okay, you all know the second law off by heart. You go into the room, you tidy it up, what happens? That's the second law. Disorder always increases. The thing is that as long as it's treated in the thermodynamics way, it's always been seen as order-disorder. And our universe started in an incredibly ordered state and has been ostensibly becoming disordered through its thermodynamic properties. But here's the key. Here's the thing. A communications engineer called Claude Shannon, who was working for IBM, realised that exactly the same equation that describes thermodynamic entropy can also describe, and in fact does describe, the informational content of a system. So think of our universe as a whole. What we have is information expressed as space-time. Okay? Began at the Big Bang, which is neither big nor a bang, but began at that point in its lowest content state. So all the energy and matter that information expressed in that way was there. But it was like a new baby being born. It was like a baby universe, a universe soul. And that baby was born with the greatest level of order, the minimum informational content expressed as space and time, so that from that moment, 13.8 billion years ago, the entropy, the informational entropy, has continued to increase. In other words, the experiential aspect of consciousness within our universe has continued to move forward. Now, what that means is that time itself flows. Time itself is the entropic flow of the universe. It's the information flow of the universe. But more than that, it also explains why space is as it is, as the construct it is. And to do that, I need to take a step sideways. But just bear with me that what restating these two laws in informational terms does, it explains quantum mechanics and it explains relativity theory, because if the first law is about energy matter with no notion of time, the second law restated is all about space and time. It's all about relativity. So instead of being irreconcilable, which they've been for 80 years or more, this restatement in informational terms allows quantum theory and relativity theory at last to be reconciled into a whole understanding of what physical reality is all about. But to take a step sideways, to refer back to the holographic aspect that Ellen was talking about. When I was 19 years old, I was at the University of Oxford doing physics, masters in physics. And there's a wonderful man there called Dennis Sharma. And have any of you seen the film Theory of Everything with Eddie Redmayne? Okay, Stephen Hawking. Well, you might not remember, but there's an older scientist there who's really lovely. His name's Dennis Sharma. And he was Stephen Hawking's mentor, and he was my mentor as well. And Stephen's quite a bit older than me, but when I was 19 years old, and at Oxford, he was a rising star with another mathematician called Roger Penrose, and Dennis invited them over to give a talk on black holes. Now, black holes were just being discovered then, talking about the early 70s, 72. So it was a postgraduate seminar, and I was the youngest person in the room, and it was fantastic. And Dennis said you should write the essay about this, and there was an essay prize at the university, and I wrote an essay on black holes, and I won the university prize. And it was 25 quid, $40. That was a long time ago, so that was all very long. But what is amazing for me now, all these years after, is how black hole thermodynamics, restated informationally, is also giving us fundamental insights into the nature of our universe. Because some while ago, and Stephen was at the forefront of this, people were asking what happens to the information of a star when it falls down into a black hole. Because what happens is the gravity is so powerful that not even light can escape, and what you have around the sort of surface area of the black hole is what's called an event horizon. And there's a massive debate and fisticuffs, and it gets very hissy-fitty when things like that happen. What happened to the information? Well, again, to cut a long story short, what was realised is the information is actually held on the event horizon. Now that may seem, yes, so what-ish, but if you think about the brick, this brick, and think of all the information you think might go into that, I think you probably feel that the information, if the brick was sort of larger volume, there'd be more information on it, yeah? That the information in the brick would be proportional to its three-dimensionality, yeah? The thicker the brick, the bigger the brick, whatever. That isn't the case in terms of black hole, because the black hole's information is held on its surface area. So, if you go to the ping pong, if you go to the ping pong ball, and black holes are extraordinarily spherical because everything needs to pull to the same degree, all the information that that star had accumulated since its birth is not proportional to the three-dimensionality of the black hole, but is proportional to its two-dimensional surface area. Okay? Now, Nora, you'll know the answer to this, but a hologram, a three-dimensional hologram, right, that looks like a 3D object, actually is a two-dimensional projection. You know? So all the information in a hologram is actually encapsulated on a two-dimensional film through which a light is shone and holograms created. So there's an aha moment here, a relationship between black hole information and holograms, and a realization that this black hole analogy could be extended to our entire universe. So that instead of thinking of our universe actually manifested as three dimensions, that actually it's on a holographic boundary and projected. And that's where we come to the A field, that's where we come to the phase space of complex space. What we think of as 3D reality is anything but. We do a great job of persuading ourselves, just as we persuade ourselves that brick's solid. Yeah? Just as we persuade ourselves that Lawrence and I are two separate folks. But we're not. We're all excitations in the consciousness field that is not just existing, but is exploring and evolving and emerging in a meaningful and purposeful way. So what that did, I understand that information, all the information that is being evolved and accumulated within the story, the journey of our universe soul, of which we're microcosms, we can actually understand then why space has to expand. Because if you think about the beginning of our universe, space-time, okay, 13.8 billion years ago, in the Big Bang, which, as I said, wasn't big, wasn't bang, like the ancients understood, it was an exquisite outbreath of reality. From that very small beginning, that most ordered, simple beginning, all the energy matter was there, but only the baby abilities to breathe was there at that time. That out-breath, thinking of the hologram, meant that as consciousness explored itself, every piece, every bit of information of that evolutionary process is actually on the surface area of space, or the holographic boundary of space. Now, there's one final bit to put in there, which is a chap called Jacob Bekenstein, who was also studying black holes. And what Bekenstein understood is that the tiniest scale of space-time, the Planck scale, which is as small compared to an atom as the atom is to our universe, minute. From that Planck scale, by encoding one bit of information at every Planck scale, as the universe, as our universe, and everything within it evolves, space has to expand. Because it has to encompass more and more and more Planck areas. It's like blowing up a balloon. But instead of the areas growing bigger, there are more areas. Because we're evolving, we're learning, we're experiencing, we're co-creating. So what we're having now, on this leading edge, this emergent understanding, is a way of bridging between experiential awareness of consciousness and a working model that finally brings it all together in a scientific perspective which reconciles science and consciousness, and also, by the way, reconciles quantum theory and relativity theory. Also, by the way, and we don't have time to discuss it this afternoon, but the true origin of species, because as we evolve, there is emergent information that is encoded through the underpinning fractal attractors at a point of change, at a point of emergence. So now that we're restating everything we call physical reality in these terms, in these informational, holographic terms, the reality of that, the understanding of that, is like coming up like weeds in my garden. They're everywhere, I can watch them grow. But that is amazing, because if this was just at the forefront of physics, those of us who don't get out much would love it, but that would be it. But it isn't. It's showing up, as I said earlier, in every scale and all of our human behaviours. And what this is also showing is the beautiful exquisiteness of our perfect universe. My book that's coming out is called The Cosmic Hologram. It was originally going to be subtitled How to Make a Perfect Universe. The subtitles changed, but the structure's the same within it, which is basically, how do you bake a cake? Okay? How many of you bake cakes? Not many men here, I have to say. But to bake a cake, you need the right instructions, the right conditions, the right recipe, the right ingredients, the right container, and voila, you get a perfect outcome, hopefully. Hopefully. And that's true of our universe, that's true of the way in which consciousness has co-created this amazing opportunity for us all to learn and to co-create and to grow and to evolve. First of all, the information, the right instructions, how information is embodied and encoded as energy, matter and space-time. The right ingredient, there's only one ingredient per se, that's energy matter in all its forms. The right recipe, as Einstein said, as simple as it can be, but no simpler. And the more we dig down into the underlying patternings, of which we have this incredible diversity of experience, they're simple. They're truly as simple as they can be, but no simpler. We have the container, the holographic boundary, and we have the perfect outcome, which is the ability of self-aware complexity, of self-aware beings like us, to evolve to enjoy cake. But before I finish this analogy, this metaphor, I want to sort of just put one point in here, which we talked about scale and all the rest of it, just to give you a sense of how exquisite this is, how purposeful this is. When my mum, and she did a much better chocolate cake than me, made a chocolate cake, she probably, she did it so often that she wouldn't even weigh ingredients. She'd just do it by eye. And I reckon that she was probably a few percent out. It didn't matter, it always tasted good. But she was probably about a few percent out. So say 5%, or less than that, say 1%. When you're 1% out in a measurement, that's 1 in a part of 100, yeah? 1 in 10 to the 2. Now, just to give you an example of our universe was set up with such precision. So if you think of a grain of sugar, 1 grain of sugar, okay? If our universe was inaccurate to 1 grain of sugar per billion trillion kilograms of sugar, our universe couldn't exist. Literally. The degree of exquisite balance of all the forces that make up what we call physical reality, if they were out by 1 part in 10 to the 27, which is equivalent to 1 little gram, not a gram of sugar, a grain of sugar in a billion trillion kilograms of sugar, we wouldn't be here. Now, I call that meaningful. But the other point is, well, how did that happen? Because the other thing that cosmologists are realising, astrophysicists are realising, and Irving made mention of it earlier, is that the latest measurements suggest that 90% of all the stars that could be formed in our universe from the availability of hydrogen have already been born. Our sun, our Sol, is a 3rd or 4th generation star, which is why we're here. Because the earliest stars burnt hydrogen, and then when they died or when they exploded, they seeded more complex nutrients, carbon and oxygen and nitrogen, into the interstellar gas clouds. But it took probably 2 to 3 generations to get the sort of really heavier elements that comprise rocky planets, such as Gaia, and atmospheres such as we've got. So we're a 3rd or 4th generation planetary system able to nurture within the homeostasis of Gaia's environment the emergence and evolution of biological life to this form, to this point and onwards. Yeah? And that is an exquisite story of itself. But the point is that, I've got an interesting piece for you, and I'll go back to other universes. Right. Talking about expansion of space, talking about that expansion of space, recognising the information within space-time. So the more space expands, the more evolution there is. What was very interesting was when I realised that the expansion of space began to accelerate 5 billion years ago. Now what I'm wondering, and it's purely speculation, that was the time when our sun was born. That's the time when our planetary system was born. But if we look around the other stellar systems in our galaxy and the thousands of exoplanets, the rocky exoplanets that we're now discovering, it suggests that it needs to be 3rd or 4th generation star systems, planetary systems, for biological life and self-aware biological life to evolve. So around 5 billion years ago, would probably have been around the time when throughout our entire universe, such planetary systems were coming into being. Is that why space began to accelerate at that point? That consciousness itself is accelerating. We talk about evolution, and space doesn't just expand linearly. It either slows down or it speeds up, and it's speeding up now. And what we have is an explosion, my sense is, in all the good ways, of consciousness exploring itself. So one final piece of this is how come our universe was so smart to begin with? We love our children, aren't they, clever little darlings? But how come our universe was so smart to begin with? And Evan, you mentioned, I think, black holes. What's being understood, and it is still very hypothetical, but the evidence is suggesting that new universes bud off from the core, extreme core conditions, possibly in supermassive black holes, maybe not in general stellar black holes. And there was a lovely addition to general relativity theory that was put forward by Einstein, Carter, Kibble, and my mentor, Dennis Sharma, called ECKS, extension of relativity. And what that suggests is that those incredibly extreme conditions at the heart of supermassive black holes, the intrinsic spin, not the normal spin that we're used to of planets around suns, but within elementary particles themselves, adds a certain push that actually would push them beyond the holographic boundary of our universe and literally into new universe souls. That is reincarnation, mate. And also going back to what Evan said about the end of our own lives, what happens, our consciousness of course continues, but our physical body dies. And more now cosmologists are really, as I say, 90% of stars that could form pretty much formed, but realising that our universe soul is middle-aged. He is moving forward, and he had a finite birth. If we look at the information to a maximum, there's a lot of stuff here I won't go into, but it's suggesting a finite completion. Exactly how that happens, there are various views of that, including the other chap who was there when I was 19 years old, called Roger Penrose, who is still at Oxford, and he's got a view of how it ends. But more and more there is this sense of the exploration of consciousness that we call our universe soul is finite in both space and time. It was born as a beautiful baby universe soul with all the understanding it needed, but then evolved. And it will come to an end, but its consciousness will continue. We are microcosms of that consciousness. We play, we explore ourselves, we are holographic, we reflect each other. The same, I worked as a healer, I work as a planetary healer amongst other things now, I do a lot of work with healing of nations, healing of conflict. And it's the same happenings that play out. So when we have an emotional trauma, we play it out at individual levels, we play it out at family levels for sure, we play it out at many different holographic levels, including nations and including our collective. What this emergent whole world view is revealing is that we are all unique and yet universal microcosms of a macrocosmic cosmic intelligence, truly a cosmic hologram we call our universe. We are evolving, it is evolving, Gaia is evolving. It is, as Irving said, coherent, unified entity. It is a living being. When we expand the concept of living beyond just biology, where we realise that everything is consciousness, then we're part of this amazing journey together. We have a purpose, we have a destiny, we have a role to play. And I feel we are now able to come together to realise this whole world view, not just of science, hey, whatever, but as a human collective consciousness. And when we realise this, and it is literally on the verge of, I think you said 5-10 years from now, the old view will just be like, it's gone. And when things change, they change so quickly. And when Irving knows when complex systems change, they do what they call bifurcate. And what happens on a very simple level, supraphysically, beneath all the part of all the patterning that plays out in a complex system are attractors, basins of attractors, from which the fractal patterns that play out emerge. When a system, for a long time, a system can be in what's called critical stability. So it's on the edge between order and disorder. It plays around a boundary. Our climate, for example, plays around a boundary called the Lorentz attractor. It's done so for a very, very long time. But when a complex system is stressed to a certain point, and that stress can be a positive push or it can be a very negative push, when it's stressed to a certain amount, it starts to move beyond the boundary. The boundaries can't hold. And what happens is potentially there is a template of another possibility that is the imagination of consciousness. And I think what's happening at the moment within our collective psyche and with our planetary psyche is that we are on the edge of bifurcation. We're on the edge, the boundaries are breaking down, it cannot be sustainable as it was. And then the issue, does it break down into chaos, or does it bifurcate into a higher coherent state of communal existence and exploration? And often what happens on an informational level when this situation is in place, two things. First of all, what's called transient information gets fed into the system undergoing the change. It's part of the emergence process. And it's there at that time of phase transition, and then it goes away. So it happens at cellular levels, it happens at ecosystem levels, it happens at the level of collective psyche. And that really is the dreaming. That is the dreaming, that is the higher octave dreaming of what could be. The other thing that happens is there's what's called flickering. And the systems flicker between their states. It's almost as though it's a dance. Am I short? Oh no, I'll go back. Am I short? No, I'll go back. So what we see played out in world events, I think, is that flickering process going through our collective psyche. And the more of us that dream the whole world, the more of us that imagine the wholeness, the more of us that can do whatever we do, be whoever we are, radiate that, the more we can supply and serve that transient template into our collective possibility. And the more we can also serve and support and help and facilitate and nurture those who are in the fear-based part of this process. So those of us who are ready to leap into love, let's get going. And let's help everybody who is still playing through the fear-based behaviours and perceptions, to some degree caused by that limited worldview, and some by their own journeys of difficulty and challenge. We are in the fierce urgency of the now, and I'm incredibly positive about our possibilities. But one of the tool that I think we perhaps not yet had and are on the verge of having is this emergent new understanding, because scientists will not go near the C word, pretty much still, but they're very happy with the I word. And yet the I word of information in formation is the slippery slope to the C word of consciousness, because you can't avoid it. It's like Tom and Jerry running off the cliff. Right? And what this does above all is bring to the forefront, unavoidably, unequivocally, that consciousness is not something we have, it's something that we and the whole world are. So thank you.